We're here with Nick Petrie. He's talking about his new book, The Drifter. To start with, why don't you give us a little background on the main character?
The main character's name is Peter Ash, and he's a U.S. Marine who's come back from the war with a souvenir. He's got post-traumatic stress that makes him claustrophobic. He can't really be inside for more than a few minutes without having a panic attack.
And what kind of prompted you to write this kind of character? Is it something in your own background, or was it just something you found interesting?
Well, so my normal life is as a home inspector, and I had clients coming back from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and talking to them made me realize how little I knew about the wars. And so I started to get interested. So I started to read, and I started to think about kind of what they were going through. And I already had a character who I had wanted to come back from the war, and that sort of took over the book. And that's really the whole heart of the book, is this experience of what it's like to go from that extreme experience to, in a pretty short period of time, back to something that for most people is just regular, normal, everyday life.
Now, I noticed in the acknowledgments you talked about running into a vet and thanking him for his service. And he said, don't say thank you for your service. And you said, what should I say? And he said, just say welcome home. And that kind of hit me. And because you've had vets coming back to this country from wars for hundreds of years, and yet, for the most part, only people who've actually experienced it get it. So, did you have to do any special kind of research? Did you talk to people to get more of their perspective on it?
Well, I did. I've talked to a lot of people, although it was not methodical in any way. This was sort of it's a conversation in the course of basically me doing my job. But you know, it's an issue I've been interested in for a long time. So I've read a lot of memoirs. I've read a lot of fiction and nonfiction about people going to war and coming home from war. So I kind of had this background, and what I really had to step it up to make sure I was being respectful and being truthful to other people's experience, because I'd never been to war. It wasn't an experience I had.
Right.
So I felt like I had to be very careful, and respectful. And in part, that's why I never write about the war itself, because that's something that I really can't, come to grips with in terms. I really wasn't there. Whereas it's really easier for me to write about being in Milwaukee and feeling like you're like something's not right. So that was sort of my approach to it.
So now, and this kind of ties in with part of what I love about this genre, is you can take something that is significant and timely, like vets coming back to the real world and how they're dealing with it, and use a vehicle like a thriller or a mystery to show that, and yet not hit people over the head with it. So the character background, I get where that comes from. Where did the gem of the story come from? Where did the beginning of that originate?
Well, at the same time, I was talking to these customers of mine who were vets coming home from overseas. This all started right around the same time as the economic meltdown. So, I was reading about these Wall Street hotshots who were inventing, the credit default swap, but didn't have any idea of what the consequences would be, and the housing bubble kicking into play. And I was also inspecting all of these foreclosures, because people were losing their homes, and then other people were buying them back from the bank, and these houses were really in rough shape. And I have a pretty vivid imagination, and I was imagining what life was like for the people who had owned those homes before, and who were, waiting for the sheriffs to come evict them from their houses. So I was getting pretty pissed off. So some of that is in the book too. I mean, those are kind of the other components to me, is sort of the economic downturn and the you know, crimes and misdemeanors on Wall Street. I mean, a lot of people got pissed off, but it sort of swirled around in my head, and this is kind of what came out.
Now, do you find that being able to put some of this stuff down on paper, as it were, is kind of therapeutic? Because I've been told by people that if they didn't have the outlet of writing, that they would probably be much more angry.
Well, my wife tells me that if I don't have a writing project, I'm kind of a pain in the ass to live with. I have a fair amount of energy, and I need to do something with it. So this story in particular did a lot for me and kind of helped me get through some years where we were all kind of having a hard time, I think. But writing in general, yeah, that really, you know, when I don't have that work to do, my life is not as pleasant. And my wife's life apparently is not as pleasant.
Now, you have a day job and a family. When do you write?
Well, for years and years. So I've been writing for 25 years, and this is the first book I've published. So for years and years I would write, when I was a carpenter, I would write at lunch, I would write early in the morning before anybody got up. As a home inspector, I will write between my inspections. I'll stop at a coffee shop and, you know, drink some Joe and, you know, see what I can crank out. Now, because I have a little more obligation as a writer, I've given myself a little bit more time to do that. So I'm working about 3/4 time as a home inspector and about 3/4 time as a writer. So I'm still, you know, there's a lot of time put in, but I can kind of crowbar a little more space in my life to do this, which is wonderful.
So you're one of those guys who can kind of like find those niches of time, do some work. Do you find that you need like a certain setting to sit down and actually start typing it all in and
no, I need coffee. That's a very important part of my creative process, and I you know, it's changed. I've been doing this so many years that for a while I needed to be in a noisy place, and coffee shops were great for that because there's so much going on that it's really easy for me to sort of focus. Yeah,
kind of a static in the background.
Yeah, I have to tune it out, and that lets me tune in to what I'm trying to do. One year for Father's Day, my wife got me some noise-canceling headphones, which was a wonderful gift for any writer. And I realized that the time I was spending in coffee shops, I was getting less and less done because I was having trouble not being distracted. And then I slap on the headphones and the whole world goes away. And it's also great because, you know, people who know me don't bother me because that's sort of my signal. Hey, I'm working.
Right.
And strangers don't strike up conversations. And I'm a big fan of talking to people, but not when I'm trying to get some work done.
Yeah. Now, and I know that there's authors, a couple that I know, who have a computer for writing that's not hooked up to the internet, and because I mean, there's so many black holes on the internet you can get sucked into. You can look up one thing, hit a YouTube video, and 2 hours later you're watching, you know, people being tasered on the beach. So do you,
whatever you're into, I guess. No, I don't have that luxury. I have one computer that I run my business on, that I write on, that you know, I try to stay off the internet. It is a giant black hole for sure. And what I've found is that it takes, because of all the things I have going on in my life, it takes a lot of discipline. And I have a little sign I wrote for myself, and I stuck it on my the dash of my truck that says "Discipline is freedom." And if I can allow myself to be disciplined, I'm freed up from all this other stuff. But then, you know, I have a pause, or I'm, you know, I'm between projects, or the real estate market slows down in the wintertime, so suddenly well, yeah, I can afford to, and then there's 3 hours gone on Facebook or wherever
Right.
else.
Now, when you sat down to start this particular book, were you thinking in terms of a series when you did the character development and creating backstory? Or were you towards the end of the book when you thought maybe this could be a series?
That's a great question. I started out thinking maybe it would be a series. And then by the time I got to the end, I just thought, I think I'm just done. I'm just done with this guy. I'm done with kind of where he's going to go. And then Putnam, who's my publisher, said, boy, we really like this, and we'd like you to write another one.
Well, and luckily the ending is set up in such a way that if it was a standalone, it works. And yet it's open in such a way that it could very easily do more.
Well, and I did tweak it a little bit to help it, to give it that. The thing that I wasn't prepared for is how much fun it was to dive back in to the second book, which is a fair amount different from the first book, and the character is someone whose company I enjoy,
right?
And it's a sensibility that makes sense to me, and in part I'm just sort of like, really, did he just do that? Which is it's just fun for me. I don't outline. I kind of write like a reader. I just write forward. So it's fun to surprise yourself.
Because I know there's a number of people who wrote a book or two, and it ended up becoming a long-going series, and it never occurred to them when he wrote the first book or two. And Reed Coleman just started a new series, very first book, and having done quite a few books with Mo Prager, now setting up a new series, I think he's probably in a little bit better position. And you're a reader. You've been reading for a long time. So you probably are aware of, if you're setting up a character for a series, there's certain things going into it, if it's going to be a series that you can kind of set up, especially coming into the second book with him.
Well, no, you're absolutely right, and part of the elements were really there from the beginning. Like I say, I started out thinking about this as a series, and then I just thought, well, I don't know if I can do this again. But I did write with those elements, and one of those elements is that I didn't want to be locked into one location or even one kind of story. So when you're writing a PI novel that's set in Boise or wherever that, you have some you have some options, but you're sort of stuck in Boise, right? Because that's the nature, or a police novel, or that you can write a book that's somewhere else, but you have to come back to Boise.
So right from the beginning, you've kind of eliminated that cage. Well, like John Sanford wrote Davenport in the Twin Cities for years, and eventually changed the series that opened it up so Davenport could go to other parts of other states, and it frees him up not just being in that one location.
Well, and part of it's just selfish on my part, is I'm very interested in the world, and I like to go places, and it's an excuse to get in the car or to get on a plane and to go do some exploring. And it's easy, I think, to kind of fall back on some of those old habits, and you begin to describe things the same way. I really don't want to write 10 books that are exactly the same. The goal is to continue to surprise myself and surprise my readers, and to entertain myself. Writing fiction is takes a lot of long hours, and it's no fun to be bored. The goal is to entertain myself.
Well, and the fact is stranger than fiction, but I've heard it said that with fiction you actually have to be more worried about it being believable, because there's things you see in the news, especially now with the internet. You get access to more news. Some of these stories, if somebody was to actually fictionalize it and put it into a book, nobody would believe it, and they'd just say this is too far-fetched. So you have to have a certain amount of logic, and given this genre, as opposed to other genres, there needs to be a certain amount of logic to it, and you can't like cheat the reader. You can't come in at the last minute and go, oh, Andy's got an evil twin brother and he did it.
Well, I mean, writers do that, and I think, I certainly understand that you can write yourself into a corner and try to find a way out, and I seem to do that a lot. But the realism piece is important to me, and it's not it's not real, but I want something that you're going to say, wow, that could happen. This is not a comic book hero.
Right.
I wanted somebody who could live in the real world. You could say, oh, I know a guy just like that.
Somebody who's got some scars. Well, and somebody who's not invulnerable and is always going to come out on top.
Yes. And I just think it's more interesting that way. When when it feels more real, you have a lot more at stake as a reader in how well they're going to do.
Now, when you're doing research for the books and you're looking into things, and hopefully when you can actually go to places in person more than just book research, do you find yourself discovering things that change what you're writing?
Absolutely. I start with a little bit of research on the things that I'm interested in, and I begin to write. And as I work my way through, I think, oh, I need to know more about this. Oh, I got to know more about that. And so I dig in. In the case of this book, which is set in Milwaukee, I did a lot of driving around Milwaukee, and I wanted to find the exact house. I want that the widow of my character's best friend lives in. I wanted to find the warehouse where a big piece of the story takes place. So I drove around and around, and it's so much fun, and it's part of what I do anyway as a home inspector. Is I'm in different neighborhoods all the time.
Well, and I know some authors I've talked to. There's an author who I won't name, but every book takes place in a different part of the country. His character goes everywhere. And I asked him about the book that took place in Texas right after it came out. And I said, how much time did you spend in Texas? He said, I spent an hour on Google. And there's another author, Greg, who I just gave you a book by, who has actually had friends that are Navy SEALs sneak into his house at 4 in the morning and kidnap him, throw him in the back of a car, blindfolded, and drop him off somewhere and say, get home, and leave. And he takes it a bit further.
Yeah.
So I would imagine there's kind of a happy middle ground there.
Yeah, I'm probably in the middle there. I don't know. I understand that research takes time and it takes energy, but you find so much along the way. You find plot, you find character, you find just funky little details. So if you can make it work and spend an hour on Google, that's great. That's not something I could do personally. Because
that's kind of like a starting point, basically. You find something that might be interesting, then go out and find the real thing.
Yeah. Well, and I'm interested in the world. I want the books to be rooted in the real world. One of the funny things is that once you start doing research on something that you think you're making up, you discover that that's actually out there already. That there's some variation on that's actually real. Which is kind of humbling that your imagination can't really live up to the real world. But I just find so much more by diving into the world.
Now, as far as ideas go, do you find yourself, just like in everyday life, coming across situations or experiencing things or witnessing things? Do you ever sock little things away, like a notebook?
Oh, all the
just
time.
Saying, this conversation, somewhere along the line, I'm going to find a good spot for that.
All the time. And sometimes I use it and sometimes I don't. I keep a pad by the bed. I have a little black Moleskine notebook that goes most places with me. I have a little special pen I use. Just, but mostly, I almost never refer back to those things, but what it does is it locks it in my brain.
Yeah.
And it makes me be aware. It makes me pay attention. So it really helps if you, to some extent, you're kind of always in that mode.
Well, I've noticed a lot of authors seem to be more observant than your typical person, because they're taking in everything.
Well, that's the job. I mean, it's to take in the world and to return it in another form, but that is interesting and compelling, and hopefully will keep people turning the pages and will reflect back on the world.
Right. Well, and the beauty of this is the medium you're using, it's strictly in your head onto the paper. You don't have to convey it to an artist like they do with a comic book, and while a lot of times that works, it doesn't always necessarily work. Or doing television or movie where you're limited by funds. We can't do this scene up in the Alps because we can't afford to go to the Alps.
Right.
Whereas you basically can do anything anywhere, and you're not limited by any budget or any constrictions, except maybe reality.
Well, that's right, and it's a wonderful thing, but it's also, I find that I have to give myself limitations, because otherwise, there are way too many options. I was a carpenter for a lot of years, and I have always preferred renovating an old house to building a new house, because you already have a structure, you already have something that you're working within.
Right.
And that doesn't mean you can't do something wonderful, but too much freedom for me. I need I need a frame. I need some kind of something to grab onto.
And yet you don't outline. So that's kind of interesting.
Well, and maybe those go hand in hand, because if I could start with an outline, maybe I would begin to limit myself.
So are you finding that when the first draft is done, when you go through the second or third time, is that more fun for you, or do you prefer that first draft?
Each is different. I write forward until I stop, because I made a wrong turn, because I haven't figured out what happens next, and usually it's because I made a move I shouldn't have made. I added the wrong character, or the character has the wrong something, or something happens or doesn't happen, and then I kind of back up. And if I can't work my way forward, then I go back to the beginning. And I say, okay, this is what I have so far.
So you kind of edit as you go?
Yeah, and then I work my way forward, and I read and I rewrite. And then sometimes I get enough momentum I can kind of, bump that obstacle loose and keep going.
Kind of almost like plowing snow.
Yeah.
You get to a certain point where you got to stop, empty the shovel.
That's a great metaphor.
Now, does anybody read the book before you're finished? Do you have any people who read for you while you're writing?
Nobody really reads while I'm writing except my wife. And she mostly says, you are being annoying, and you should show me what you're working on so that I can tell you what's the matter, or just give you the thumbs up and shove you out the door again. It's actually a funny story. Somebody asked me not long ago, was this just for guys? Was this like a macho book? Which was a funny question, because I really, my wife is really the primary reader, and my wife doesn't read a lot of mysteries and thrillers. My wife reads, domestic dramas. My wife reads historical fiction. So it's got to be something that is going to appeal to her, or she's not going to, she's not going to help.
So kind of a good beta test too.
Oh, it's great. It's great. And she's a fantastic editor. So she's got a great eye. She always reads with a pen in her hand. So it's a huge help. And my mom is a huge reader. My sister's a huge reader. So they'll often read something kind of right before the last draft. I have a neighbor who's a maniac, and so she was actually wonderful with this one, where she just sort of said, "You're good," which was wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly nerve-wracking to be ready to put something in the mail, and it's all kind of in your head, and you don't really know how what you've done and how good it is, and you might hope, you might think, well, that's pretty good, and it's not so good, and I made this choice here. So it's nice to have somebody else to kind of say, well, no, that wasn't such a good choice, or no, that's fine.
Well, I've noodled around with fiction just a little bit, and when I very first started doing any writing that I showed anybody, it irritated me a little bit being edited. But I very quickly realized having an editor, especially a good editor, is amazing. And I kind of don't trust authors who say my work doesn't need any editing. Because I can't help but think that by the time you finish a whole book, it's like, your son or your daughter, and how dare you say they're not perfect.
Well,
and you're a little too close to it.
Well, though, there's an expression called "you have to kill your babies," where you have a phrase or a sentence or a paragraph or a scene or a character that you're just way too close to. That's not working, and editors exist, in part to say, nope, gotta go.
Because truthfully, it shouldn't be adversarial. They want your book to be as good as it can be, for a number of reasons.
Right.
Part of it is still business, and they need to be able to sell copies. But also, they want your work to be as good as it can be as well.
Well, and a good editor is an astounding thing. One of the best things about my relationship with Putnam is the editor I'm working with, who is just, she's I don't know, not quite 20 years younger than I am, and she is so smart. And she just has this laser eye. She finds every corner where I just didn't quite, I hadn't quite figured that piece out, and I sort of swept this piece under the carpet. And she, I don't know how she does it, but she is just fantastic.
Now, was there any advice you've either heard or been given about writing? One of the best things I ever heard, somebody asked Robert Crace, if you were to give one piece of advice to somebody who's just starting out, what would it be? And he said, when you're done, go back and read what you've written and take out half of it. Is there any nugget like that jumps out at you that you've heard or read?
Well, I like that. I can't remember who said that you throw out the first 20% of everything you've written, because that's just what it takes you to get to that point.
Kind of get the engine revved up.
Yeah, I like that too. What I really love, Elmore Leonard wrote a wonderful essay called Advice for Writers, or 10 Things. It's a list of 10 things. Of course, now I can't remember what it was, but it's wonderful. It's quick. It's really to the point, and it's funny. It's basically, if it sounds like writing, leave it out. Leave out the parts that people skip. It's pretty common sense stuff, and applying it is a whole other matter. But to me, that's the best sort of piece about pacing and naturalistic writing, and something every aspiring writer should read.
Well, and that would be coming again back to, you get kind of close to it, and you spend so much time with it, it could get kind of precious to you, and being able to look at your own work with kind of an outside eye, saying, if I was reading this part here would bore me.
Right.
Because the one thing I've also heard a lot is write what you would want to read. So what kind of, when you aren't writing and working and you're reading, who are some of your favorite authors?
Oh my goodness. That's always a hard question. Well, going back to my life as a younger man, I started out reading science fiction and mysteries, and John D. MacDonald and Robert Heinlein, and kind of all that stuff, which is so compulsively readable. You just fall in, and it's a voice that you just it's someone who is just really good company, who can kind of talk you through anything. So to me, that voice is really important. Robert Crace is like that. Robert Parker also really was like that. Elmore Leonard is like that. And I always really feel like that if you want to write, you should really read above yourself, right? So read. If you want to write. If you want to write a good romance novel, you can't read romance novels. You've got to read, better than that. If you want to write a good mystery, you can't just be reading mysteries. So I also read, Jim Harrison and Cormac McCarthy, oh God, Cormac McCarthy, the Border Trilogy is fantastic. God, what else was I just thinking about? What's on my bookshelf? Richard Price. Oh my God, I should have a list. I should really plan ahead for this.
Well, that's not a bad list to start. Okay, so when does the next book come out?
The next book should come out in 2017 in January. The only thing left are the copy edits, which is great. And I've started on the third book, which is also a Peter Ash book, so the third in the series. And I'm kind of noodling around, and I've got less than I would like to have at this point.
But so far you're on about one a year, about the same time of year schedule.
That's what my publisher would like, and it's a great schedule because you really can you know, the more you write, the more you can do. You know, my first 3 books, which are not published and will never be published, each took me about 5 years to write. This book took me about 3.5 years to write. So they asked me. Putnam said, "Well, we'd like to publish this, but part of the agreement is you have to produce another book in a year," and it just freaked me out. But a friend of mine had, one of his lines is, you know, the faster you work, the more mistakes you can make, and the more mistakes you can make, the more gems you produce. And you know, writing that book in a year was actually freeing, because it's you can't overthink, you can't, you know, you just have to spit it out, and some really fun stuff came out.
Well, and right now you're kind of a book ahead already. You've got next year's taken care of.
Well, it's a long process, right?
Yeah.
So this book found its way to Putnam in June of 2014, and it's a year and a half to make it through the pipeline. They already have a bunch of books they're planning to put out. You don't get to jump ahead in line. They need to get the book in the hands of booksellers and guys like you, people who, you know, can read and provide feedback and generate some interest. So the book business, you know, there's a long process to get from a finished edit to on the bookshelf.
Right. Well, and even just artwork. I mean, testing it to make sure they're getting the right cover. Women don't like to buy books with guns on them. Men don't want to buy books with flowers on them. You know, there's just so many little idiosyncrasies. This season, there's 30 other books coming out that have red on the cover, so let's go with something different.
Right, right. Well, and there's the design of the inside of the book. There are just the editing process. So we went through 3 rounds with my primary editor, and then I went through 3 more rounds with the copy editor, which was, I think of myself as a guy who knows where the comma goes. That was a painful process. And again, the copy editor that I worked with was fantastic. And then they do cold reads. So they just give it to people in the office. Does this make sense? Because once the editors have been through it a couple of times, it's harder for them to see it.
Right.
So I mean, it was an incredibly in-depth, thorough process. Again, I was completely impressed. I have nothing but good things to say about Putnam.
Well, and so far, all the feedback I've been reading about the book agrees with my thoughts on it, and I think it's terrific, and it's a really nice start to what sounds like it's going to be an awesome series.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So, hopefully this launch in the next few days goes well. We'll plan on being there. I'm going to wrap this up with the question I used to use to end all my interviews. What is the one thing always in your refrigerator?
Oh my goodness. Salsa. Well, there's a list of things that are always in my refrigerator. Salsa, ketchup. I'm kind of a condiments guy. Yeah.
That works. All right, thanks.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it.